In the early decades of the 20th century, the human heart was an absolute fortress that no surgeon dared to open. To cut into a beating chest was to invite instant, uncontrollable death, turning operating rooms into places of cold horror. Doctors could only stand by helplessly while young patients suffocated from simple blockages, trapped inside bodies that refused to give them another second of life. Every hospital wall contained this unspoken truth, enforcing a strict boundary that medicine refused to cross. Any surgical attempt to cut into an active heart meant drowning the surgical field in blood, cutting off oxygen to the body, and killing the patient on the table. The chest remained a dark chamber where disease ruled without any possibility of cure. On a freezing October night in 1930, a young physician named John Gibbon sat beside a dying woman in a Philadelphia hospital. She was only 18 years old, struck down by a massive blood clot lodged deep inside her lung artery. Hour after hour, Gibbon watched her lips turn a terrifying shade of blue, while her heart strained uselessly to push blood past the obstruction. Through 17 grueling hours of this death vigil, the patient drifted in and out of consciousness, while her organs slowly starved for oxygen. Every shallow, desperate breath she took pushed her closer to total systemic collapse. Gibbon could feel her pulse weakening under his fingers, knowing that the physical barrier killing her was less than an inch wide, yet entirely beyond reach. At 2 o'clock in the morning, with her pressure collapsing entirely, the senior surgeon finally decided on a desperate emergency operation. He sliced open her chest in a last attempt to cut out the clot, but within 6 short minutes, the young woman was dead on the blood-soaked operating table. The room fell silent as the team pulled the sheet over her face, defeated by time and blood loss. Standing over her motionless body, a dark spark of obsession took root in John Gibbon's mind. He realized that if a machine could temporarily take over the job of her heart and lungs, draining the dark blood, filling it with life-giving air, and pumping it back into her body, the surgeon could have safely cleared the blockage. That single horrifying night transformed his life into a dangerous crusade. When Gibbon shared his idea with older colleagues, he was met with cold hostility and disbelief. Famous medical authorities across the globe considered the heart to be a sacred, untouchable organ governed by natural laws that humans had no right to alter. They warned the young doctor that trying to stop a living heart would ruin his professional career and label him a dangerous eccentric. For decades, the global medical community had accepted this grim mortality as an unchangeable law of nature. Generations of doctors learned to accept defeat before the chest was ever opened, choosing professional safety over risky ideas. The absolute belief that the heart could never be paused meant that thousands of preventable deaths were treated as simple inevitabilities. The fundamental barrier was a strict biological timer that allowed zero room for mistake. The human heart functions as a relentless mechanical pump, driving blood into soft, spongy lungs where it drops off carbon dioxide and collects oxygen. If this continuous circuit stops for more than 4 short minutes, the human brain suffers permanent destruction and dies. A surgeon trying to repair a damaged valve or patch a hole inside a heart needed dozens of quiet, bloodless minutes to work. Attempting to stitch delicate tissue while blood flooded the chest cavity was completely impossible. Without a way to pause the heart while keeping the brain alive, every cardiac defect remained a guaranteed death sentence. By 1934, unable to secure support in Philadelphia, Gibbon moved to a dark, isolated basement laboratory at Harvard University. Working long after midnight, in rooms that reeked of harsh chemicals and metallic blood, he began assembling crude glass tubes, rubber hoses, and hand-blown glass bulbs. He had no major funding and almost no official backing for his project. Fellow researchers mocked his efforts, calling him a crazy dreamer who was foolishly trying to play God with human lives. He spent his days in total professional isolation, working in damp rooms beneath the hospital where few people ever visited. Yet the memory of the young woman dying in 1930 kept him anchored to his workbench, despite the overwhelming skepticism. His initial experiments on small animals were marked by gruesome mechanical failures and sudden deaths. Gibbon connected cats to his crude glass apparatus, trying to redirect their blood flow through primitive pumps and air chambers. Time after time, the mechanical forces ripped the delicate blood components apart, ending the trials in immediate failure. The glass tubes frequently caused the living blood to react as if it had struck a metal blade, turning liquid into thick, dark jellies that clogged the pipes. In other tests, air bubbles became trapped in the swirling fluid, shooting straight into the animals' brains and killing them in seconds. Every early success was quickly followed by another horrific reminder of how far he remained from saving a human life. John Gibbon did not carry this dark burden alone. Beside him stood Mary Hopkinson, his wife and most devoted lab partner, who bound her own life to his terrifying quest. Together in the dim basement, they poured their own small savings into buying glass tubes, pumps, and metal fittings, foregoing a normal life for a desperate secret mission. Mary spent endless hours running delicate chemical tests on animal blood and cleaning stained glass equipment by hand. The mental toll was heavy, as every failed experiment in the cold room meant another life slipping away in their hands. Yet her quiet strength kept Gibbon from abandoning the dream when the rest of the medical world turned its back. In 1935, a sudden break in the darkness finally came. Inside the quiet laboratory, Gibbon attached a small cat to his homemade mechanical device and carefully clamped shut the main artery leading from its heart. For 20 full minutes, the animal's natural heart sat still and empty, while the noisy whirring machine pumped oxygen into its veins and kept it alive. When Gibbon unclamped the blood vessel, the cat's heart restarted and the animal survived without any brain damage. It was an astonishing triumph, proving for the very first time in human history that a mechanical system could temporarily replace a living heart. But the victory brought a chilling realization, because scaling this tiny glass apparatus up to save a human being presented terrifying new dangers. The primary barrier was a gruesome biological reality. Living human blood is an incredibly delicate fluid, designed by nature to travel only inside smooth, soft vessels. The moment red blood cells touch cold steel, hard glass, or rigid plastic, the physical impact acts like a microscopic blade, shattering the fragile cells and releasing lethal toxins into the body. If the artificial surface did not destroy the cells, it triggered another deadly reaction. The body's natural defense systems instantly viewed the metal surfaces as a massive wound, causing the blood to form thick, heavy clots inside the machine. These jagged clots would then shoot directly into a patient's brain or lungs, killing them in seconds. Before Gibbon could solve this deadly problem, World War II tore him away from his laboratory. Drafted into the Army Medical Corps, he was sent deep into the remote jungle war zones of the South Pacific. Night after night, surrounded by mud and heavy gunfire, he operated on young soldiers suffering from terrible chest wounds and torn hearts. Watching hundreds of young men bleed to death on crude wooden cots deepened his haunting drive. Every soldier who died in his arms from chest trauma reminded him of the young woman in Boston years earlier. He swore that if he survived the brutal jungle war, he would build a working machine no matter what the cost. Returning home after the war, Gibbon accepted a surgical position at Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia. He hoped his military service and bold ideas would earn him support, but the local medical establishment met him with icy skepticism. Senior doctors in Philadelphia viewed his artificial heart project as a foolish, dangerous gamble that threatened the hospital's reputation. Hospital directors refused to fund his work, forcing Gibbon to hunt for outside help. Medical schools considered the idea of taking over a human patient's circulation to be reckless science fiction, Without proper machinery and expert engineering, his dream was completely stuck in place. A chance meeting changed everything when Gibbon was introduced to Thomas Watson, the powerful head of IBM. Fascinated by the bold idea, Watson agreed to help and assigned top engineering talent to the project. IBM turned its massive industrial resources toward building a revolutionary medical machine, forging steel and wire into something the world had never seen. For 3 years, master engineers collaborated directly with Gibbon in Philadelphia, translating crude laboratory ideas into precise mechanical blueprints. They constructed a massive, highly complex instrument that replaced primitive glass bottles with polished stainless steel and electric circuit boards. The simple basement idea had transformed into a giant industrial centerpiece. The finished IBM Gibbon heart-lung machine was a towering silver cabinet that looked like something out of a science fiction nightmare. Standing over 5 feet tall and weighing nearly 1,000 pounds, it filled the room with a rhythmic, mechanical thudding sound. Inside its gleaming frame sat complex pumps, temperature regulators, and dangerous electric motors. Clear plastic tubes wound through rotating steel drums, carrying blood into a tall chamber filled with wire screens. As dark, oxygen-starved blood poured down these metal screens, fresh oxygen gas was blown across it, mimicking the action of human lungs. It was a terrifying sight, a massive metal monster designed to hold a human life in the balance. 2 critical breakthroughs finally provided the key to keeping blood alive outside the body. First came the precise application of heparin, a potent blood thinner that prevented red cells from instantly clotting upon contact with glass and rubber tubes, paired with a second chemical agent that could safely reverse the thinning once the surgery ended. Second was the development of smooth roller pumps, which gently squeezed flexible tubing in continuous, rhythmic sweeps, pushing blood forward without crushing delicate blood cells against mechanical walls. Together, these twin innovations tamed the deadly physics that had destroyed every previous attempt at mechanical circulation. The roller pumps mimicked the soft, pulsing squeeze of human tissue, ensuring that oxygen-rich fluid could travel through feet of external tubing without creating fatal turbulence. For the first time, a mechanical system could temporarily replace a living pump without destroying the very blood that sustained human life. While John Gibbon refined his mechanical circuit in near isolation, rival surgical teams were attempting a far more terrifying solution known as human cross-circulation. In these desperate procedures, a sick child's blood vessels were plumbed directly into the circulatory system of a living parent, using the adult's own heart and lungs to filter and pump oxygen for 2 bodies simultaneously. The psychological terror hanging over those operating rooms was unimaginable, as doctors knew that a single misstep threatened 2 lives instead of 1. An unexpected clot, a sudden drop in pressure, or a rogue air bubble meant the procedure carried a potential mortality rate of 200%, risking the instant death of both parent and child on the exact same operating table. Inside the quiet animal laboratories at Jefferson Medical College during the late 1940s, the price of perfecting the bypass machine was paid in continuous painful trials. Hundreds of dogs were connected to the prototype apparatus, their internal systems serving as the proving grounds for flow rates, oxygenation screens, and pressure regulators. Gibbon carried a profound and unspoken guilt, as score after score of these animals died on the operating table. Each death, whether caused by unexpected internal bleeding, microscopic air bubbles, or sudden mechanical jams, exposed a new flaw in the machine and reinforced the immense weight resting on his shoulders. The long-dreaded leap from animal trials to human reality occurred in 1952 with devastating consequences. A 15-month-old baby girl suffering from end-stage heart failure was rushed into the operating theater and connected to the stainless steel machine in a desperate attempt to save her life. Though the heart-lung machine worked mechanically, successfully taking over her circulation, the infant tragically died on the table when doctors discovered a second, hidden heart defect that could not be repaired. The sudden failure sent shockwaves through the medical community, leaving Gibbon facing the terrible reality of human loss. The immediate fallout plunged the clinic into an atmosphere of suffocating grief and intense public backlash. Skeptical colleagues and vocal critics openly condemned the project, dismissing the intricate machine as a lethal instrument that violated the basic boundaries of surgical safety. Crushed by the memory of the child's lifeless face and isolated by professional hostility, Gibbon fell into a deep, agonizing depression. Standing in his laboratory late at night, he came within inches of burning his research papers and dismantling the machine he had spent over 2 decades building. Hope returned in early 1953 with the arrival of an 18-year-old college student named Cecilia Bavalek. She was dying from a massive hole in her heart wall, her physical condition worsening every week as her lungs struggled to process enough oxygen to keep her alive. With her body growing weaker and traditional medicine offering no possible cure, Cecilia and her family chose to risk everything on Gibbon's machine. Knowing the immense danger involved, they accepted the experimental surgery as her absolute last chance at survival. On the morning of May 6, 1953, inside Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia, an icy tension filled the operating theater. Surgical nurses carefully double-checked every rubber valve, primed the clear glass tubes with donor blood, and calibrated the mechanical pumps under the bright, hot operating lamps. As the unconscious young woman lay quiet on the table, surrounded by a team bound by total silence, the towering IBM machine hummed softly in the background. Every eye in the room was fixed on the sterile steel instruments, waiting for the moment when a human life would be transferred entirely into the hands of a machine. Then came the defining moment of absolute risk on May 6, 1953, inside the operating theater at Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia. John Gibbon reached into the 18-year-old girl's open chest cavity and placed heavy stainless steel clamps directly across the vena cava, the major blood vessels feeding into Cecilia Bavalek's heart. With a single tight squeeze, he cut off the flow of living blood completely. Her natural heart drained empty, turning pale, still and silent in an instant, as 4,000 cubic centimeters of blood per minute diverted into plastic tubing. For the first time in human history, a living person lay on an operating table with a completely motionless heart, her survival resting entirely on the low, rhythmic hum of an electric pump engineered alongside IBM technicians. With the natural blood flow halted and routed away, Gibbon picked up his scalpel and made a clean incision straight into the exposed, flaccid wall of her right atrium. Instead of a rushing wave of dark arterial or venous blood flooding the surgical field, the interior chamber of the heart remained astonishingly clear under the harsh, bright operating lamps. For 26 full minutes, the inside of Cecilia's heart sat entirely dry and visible to the assembled surgical team. Outside her body, the tall stainless steel machine pulled her dark, oxygen-depleted venous blood, spread it in thin liquid films across spinning mesh discs inside a glass cylinder to absorb oxygen, and pushed it back safely into her subclavian artery. Inside the chest cavity, the atmosphere was thick with quiet dread as Gibbon worked with meticulous speed and absolute precision. Working inside the motionless organ, he used delicate silk sutures to carefully stitch a 3-centimeter congenital atrial septal defect closed, permanently sealing the gaping hole in her heart septum that had slowly been draining her vitality. Looking down into a wide-open chest and seeing a frozen, motionless organ was a terrifying, surreal experience for every surgeon and nurse present in the room. It felt almost unnatural to witness a human body so eerie and quiet, held in a delicate balance between life and death by a complex maze of plastic tubes, electric motors, and steel valves. Once the internal repair was complete and the atrial incision was securely stitched shut, Gibbon reached back into the chest to release the heavy metal clamps from the main blood vessels. Warm, oxygen-rich blood flooded back into the pale heart tissue, rapidly filling the empty chambers and repressurizing the coronary arteries once again. The entire operating room fell dead silent, with assistants and anesthesiologists frozen in place and nobody daring to breathe or move. The medical team stood poised over the sterile table, waiting in agonizing anticipation to see if the motionless muscle would shock back to life or remain a lifeless, flaccid piece of tissue forever. Then, the pale muscle twitched, quivered with a brief flurry of movement, and suddenly jumped back into a strong, steady rhythm. The mechanical bypass machine was slowly dialed down and disconnected from her blood vessels as Cecilia's own restored heart took back the full, independent burden of pumping blood through her body. Days later, 18-year-old Cecilia Bavalek woke up in her hospital room, breathing easily without neurological damage, and completely cured of her fatal cardiac defect. In May 1953, inside that Philadelphia hospital, open-heart bypass surgery, using a mechanical artificial heart-lung apparatus, had officially transformed from an impossible medical dream into a proven, triumphant reality. Yet this incredible historic victory was almost immediately followed by a devastating wave of crushing medical tragedy. Over the subsequent months of 1953, Gibbon brought the complex machine back into the Jefferson Operating Theater to attempt the same life-saving procedure on two more desperate cardiac patients suffering from severe, incurable structural heart defects. Despite every precise calculation and painstaking mechanical check, both patients suffered fatal post-operative complications from complex, uncorrected anatomical defects and massive internal hemorrhage, dying directly on the operating table in Philadelphia. Their lives slipped away under the harsh overhead lights as the surgical team watched helplessly despite every desperate attempt to resuscitate them. These devastating consecutive patient losses shattered John Gibbon's professional spirit beyond repair. Although his engineered heart-lung machine had performed without a single mechanical flaw during both operations, the unpredictable biological variables of damaged human blood, complex tissue malformations, and fragile circulatory systems proved far too heavy and overwhelming for the brilliant surgeon to endure. The heavy psychological weight of those lost human lives haunted his every waking moment, draining his professional resolve and plunging him into a deep emotional collapse. Crushed by personal grief, Gibbon made the agonizing decision to step away from open-heart surgery forever, leaving others to refine the miraculous machine he had spent 20 years creating. In the aftermath of those tragic losses, John Gibbon made a choice that stunned his colleagues in Philadelphia. He abruptly canceled every scheduled open-heart operation, locked the doors to his experimental suite, and vowed never to perform open-heart surgery again. After spending 23 years of his life building a machine to save people from the dark edge of heart failure, the overwhelming weight of losing patients under his own care drove him completely away from the operating table. The dark irony was devastating. The man who had spent decades fighting against the biological deadline of the human brain found himself psychologically crushed by the very reality he had strived to overcome. Every time he looked at the cold stainless steel frame of his machine, he saw not the life of Cecilia Bavalek, but the quiet, unmoving faces of those he could not save. The heavy burden of responsibility proved far too massive for one man to carry any longer. While Gibbon retreated into silence, the world of medicine refused to let his breakthrough fade into history. Bold young surgeons at places like the Mayo Clinic obtained his original blueprints, refined the mechanical valves, and simplified the circulating pumps. They took the dark risk that Gibbon could no longer bear, using his fundamental design to step into operating rooms across the nation and pull desperate patients back from certain death. John Gibbon stepped quietly into the background, watching from afar as other doctors received national acclaim for mastering the procedure he had invented. He offered no bitterness, nor did he fight to remain in the spotlight. He simply observed as his lifelong creation stepped out from the shadows of his personal tragedy and began saving thousands of lives every single year. Within a decade, variations of Gibbon's heart-lung machine were installed in major surgical centers across the globe. By proving that human blood could be rerouted, oxygenated, and pumped outside the body without destroying vital organs, his machine unlocked an entirely new realm of medicine. Surgeons could now pause a beating heart for hours, repairing torn valves, unclogging blocked arteries, and eventually transferring healthy hearts into failing bodies. What was once considered an absolute death sentence became a series of standard, controllable surgical steps. Modern medical teams relied on mechanical oxygenators and roller pumps that directly inherited the core mechanical principles engineered inside Gibbon's original steel cabinet. The impossible frontier of early 20th century medicine had transformed into a daily routine, restoring health to countless men, women, and children. Then came a quiet afternoon in 1973 that brought a heartbreaking end to John Gibbon's personal journey. While playing a casual game of tennis under the sun, the 73-year-old surgeon suddenly collapsed onto the court, clutching his chest. The man who had devoted his entire existence to understanding how to pause and restart the human heart suffered a sudden, massive heart attack. By the time emergency responders arrived, it was already too late. There was no artificial pump nearby, no complex network of tubes, and no team of technicians ready to take over his failing circulation. In a cruel twist of fate, the pioneer who bought precious time for the human heart died in seconds when his own heart gave out on a quiet athletic field. The legacy of Gibbon's sacrifice reshaped the entire ethical landscape of modern surgery. His ultimate retreat from practice forced medical institutions to establish rigid safety protocols, multidisciplinary surgical teams, and standardized monitoring systems so that no single physician would ever have to bear the entire crushing weight of experimental cardiac trials alone. These mandatory oversight structures transformed high-risk experimental procedures into tightly regulated collaborative operations. The personal anguish that drove Gibbon out of the operating room ultimately built the safety net that protects both patients and doctors in modern hospital wards across the globe. Beyond cardiac surgery, the fluid mechanics and oxygenation principles developed for Gibbon's machine laid the foundation for modern intensive care life support. Technologies like advanced blood pumps and external lung assist systems now keep critically ill patients alive for days or weeks while their organs heal from severe infections or trauma. Every time an emergency unit connects a patient to advanced extracorporeal life support, they are operating a direct evolution of the mechanical heart that once sat in a Philadelphia laboratory. The continuous circulation loops, chemical anti-clotting measures, and gentle suction devices remain fundamental pillars of high-complexity critical care. For millions of families today, the enduring consequence of Gibbon's work is measured not in stainless steel machinery, but in decades of life restored. Children grow up with repaired hearts, grandparents witness milestones once thought impossible, and families walk out of recovery rooms whole, entirely unaware of the deep personal pain that birthed their second chance. John Gibbon left behind a world forever altered by his relentless pursuit of truth through the darkest mysteries of human biology. Though he retreated into the quiet shadows after his greatest triumph and tragic losses, his mechanical miracle continues to beat silently in every corner of the earth, giving humanity the one thing he could not give himself: more time. In the decades following 1953, medical centers across Philadelphia, Baltimore, and major surgical hubs around the world transformed John Gibbon's mechanical substitute into the universal foundation of modern cardiac care. What began as a desperate experiment inside a small research laboratory at Thomas Jefferson University ultimately reshaped the entire standard of emergency medicine, vascular surgery, and operative risk worldwide. Hospitals and surgical teams quickly realized that artificial circulation did not merely enable complex open-heart repairs, but fundamentally changed how doctors managed physical trauma, tissue preservation, and critical life support. The mechanical apparatus proved that human cardiorespiratory biology could be safely paused, rewired through synthetic tubing, and restarted without inflicting catastrophic neurological damage or fatal organ failure. Yet historical archives still struggle to reconcile the crushing emotional price paid during those dark years of clinical trial and devastating error. Official medical records catalog the engineering triumphs, but they offer no clear answer as to how a single dedicated surgeon was expected to bear the harrowing psychological weight of consecutive pediatric mortalities before reaching a permanent breakthrough. Investigators are left to examine the precise moment where the boundary between visionary medical dedication and dangerous professional obsession blurs when human lives hang in the balance. Laboratory logs preserve the physical schematics and oxygenator fluid dynamics, but the silent internal toll on innovators who risk everything on unproven technology remains a deeply haunting aspect of medical history. Today, advanced heart-lung bypass systems operate on the exact mechanical fluid principles designed in Gibbon's early lab, supporting hundreds of thousands of complex open-chest operations every year across global surgical units. Institutional safety standards, heparin monitoring, and hypothermia protocols are built directly upon the blood flow physics and gas exchange surfaces refined during those original high-stakes clinical trials. Every complex congenital heart repair, emergency valve replacement, and extracorporeal membrane oxygenation circuit relies on that foundational architectural blueprint of non-pulsatile roller pumps and artificial gas transfer. This machine became a permanent, indispensable pillar of modern intensive medicine, turning once fatal cardiac defects and acute traumatic blockages into routinely successful, highly standardized surgical procedures. For the families of millions of recovery room patients who survived major open-heart procedures, that legacy is measured in decades of ordinary life that would have otherwise ended on a surgical table in the 1950s. Modern surgical teams now perform these delicate procedures as a matter of daily routine, operating within a safety boundary established by an inventor who quietly stepped away from cardiac surgery altogether. Inside darkened surgical suites across the globe tonight, the steady, rhythmic hum of an artificial bypass pump continues to drive oxygenated blood through clear synthetic tubing. In those quiet, high-stakes moments, the mechanical circuit smoothly maintains human life, faithfully keeping time for a motionless, arrested human heart that is waiting to safely beat once again.